after 13 years, I guess Seattle Police Department has finally learned its lesson, right? The consent decree came in after filing. What goes up to the federal government, then they come in, and the feds come in, and they start sniffing around. And 2011, they're like, we got a problem right here. Got a problem right here in River City. And so it begins. 2012, it begins. And basically, the setup is you're going to have the federal government come in and we're going to put a monitor in place, and then we're going to watch you guys, and we're going to look at the data, and we're going to make sure that you straighten everything out there, because we've got a big problem there in Seattle. I had the pleasure of talking with Bob Sales probably about a year and a half ago. Bob, you were the former King County Deputy Prosecutor, Special Assistant to the United States Attorneys in Western District of Washington, 14 years, the City of Seattle as a Public Safety Advisor with 3 mayors. And you have such a strong opinion about these consent decrees. And the last time you were on, you punched so many holes in this. The people that were listening to you, Bob, were like, really? It cost that much money? And that's what was really going on? Are you celebrating the fact that it has come to an end after 13 years?
No, there's nothing to celebrate. I mean, before the consent decree, Seattle PD was one of the best police departments in the country. Now, after 13 years of the consent decree, it's one of the worst.
Well, there's the headline. All right, Bob, thanks for joining us. We'll move on. Wait a minute. Wait. Okay, back that up. The best department, what, as compared to others? And are you looking at use of force? How do you make the statement on what facts from Seattle being best to Seattle being worst? Where were we, say, 13 years ago?
Sure. I mean, a lot of it goes back to the WTO protests. And after that, the Seattle PD did a lot of sort of soul searching and looking inward and bringing in a lot of experts. And basically, through the early 2000s, under Chief Kurlikowski, developing one of the best departments in the country. And so the department had a 3-tier civilian oversight structure. It had a comprehensive de-escalation and crisis intervention training, a very comprehensive community policing model. And I many times I went, as a city employee, went out to Washington, D.C. to hear accolades from the feds about what a great department we were. And we were so good that Chief Kurlikowski went on to become Obama's drug czar and then head of Customs and Border Patrol. So we must have been doing something right. And we were literally world experts in demonstration management. Departments would come from around the world to figure out how Seattle deals with mass demonstrations, and there were a lot of them in the early 2000s.
And we were also held up as a standard of behavior when it came to use of force. Seattle, if you look at the numbers, we were nowhere in the top 15 when it came to use of force, and there's 3 different levels of force. So here we are, we're rolling along. Other cities are coming here. We're being held in high regard. And then what happens?
Well, a series of things happened. One was the shooting of John T. Williams in 2010, which the department quickly, they had a firearms review board with a civilian advisor. The department quickly called the firearms review board to review the shooting, ruled it unjustified. The officer was told, if you don't resign, you're going to be fired. The department forwarded the case to the U.S. attorney. The U.S. attorney declined to file charges. Then they forwarded it to the county prosecutor. The county prosecutor declined to file charges. So the officer was held accountable. The department went through, again, a lot of review process and for that. There were also, this was around about this time, were a lot of cell phone videos. And there were, you saw in the news, there were some high profile use of force incidents not involving deadly force, but was on the news on repeat about, certain use of force incidents. And so the U.S. attorney at the time, Jenny Durkin, who had close ties with Seattle and was responsible for developing or recommending the development of the civilian oversight structure, she decided that there would be a pattern of practice investigation. And she got these about 33 local organizations to write a letter to her asking for a pattern of practice investigation. And so in March of 2011, the DOJ announced that they would be conducting a pattern or practice investigation, which is a statute that was passed in 1994 after the Rodney King beating, which allows the federal government to come in and do an investigation to see if there is a pattern or practice of unconstitutional policing.
Right.
And so she launched that in 2011.
And the reason this is there's the very, very high wall between the federal use of dollars, federal dollars coming into the city and asking the city to spend money in order to do federal work. So they've got this wall in place, but you can jump over the wall if the feds believe that someone's civil rights have been violated. So then they come rushing in and they start looking around. So they look around and what do they find?
Well, it's interesting because they did their investigation in 8 months, and they had a couple of experts, retired police officials, and we gave them everything they asked for. Millions of pages of documents. There was a lot of paper documents back then. They could interview anybody they wanted in the department. We were an open book. And then one night, we didn't hear anything for 8 months. And then one night in December, the U.S. attorney summons the mayor and the police chief to her office. And then they say, tomorrow morning, we're holding a national press conference with the head of the Civil Rights Division, Tom Perez. And we're going to say that you have a pattern or practice of excessive or unnecessary force. And we're going to say that 20% of all your force is unconstitutional. And the room sort of exploded because it was like the first we'd heard of it. And then the press conference the next morning. And we said, that's not possible. It's not possible that we have 20%. We review all of our use of force, and less than 1% is found to be out of policy, and much less than 1% unconstitutional. And we said, show us the cases. They refused to show us the cases. And then we said, well, we'll voluntarily implement any reform you want. They said, no, we have to force you to reform. It won't work unless we force you to reform. And the way that Jenny Durkin described it is we have to hard bake the reforms into the department. And so we spent about 8 months negotiating back and forth. And eventually, Mayor McGinn at the time decided to sign it. I argued against it as best I could. I was representing the city in the city attorney's office, but ultimately, I think politics weighed out. The city attorney, Pete Holmes, and the city council at the time were very much in favor of the consent decree. So the mayor basically said, all right, I'll do it.
I'm just going to back up for one moment. I remember reading an editorial that was in the Seattle Times some time ago. I forget the professor might have been in SPU.
Professor Matt Hickman from Seattle University.
Oh my God, bless that guy. He said, okay, show us the evidence. So you've come in here, you've said that 20%, show us where you got the numbers from. And then he dug into it. He said they spoke to people, secondhand, thirdhand sort of stuff. They concoct this whole thing that the police are completely out of control, even though just months earlier we were being held up as a beacon of how you're supposed to treat the citizens. And then all of a sudden they come up with this total BS report, which they won't show. They don't want to show anybody where it came from. There is this past history, and now it begins. So here's the question. Why? Why? Eric Holder, the 2012, he comes in, starts looking around. Jenny Durkin does this. What's the purpose of grilling Seattle Police Department, even though they didn't really have any substantial evidence to say that there was this type of abuse against the citizens? What was the motivation?
Well, I just want to go back to Professor Matt Hickman because he is really probably the first person ever to speak out publicly against consent decrees. And what he did was he just came to the city and he said, hey, I read these findings from DOJ. They don't make any sense to me. I'm a criminal justice researcher. Why don't you give me all the data you gave to DOJ and let me analyze it? So we did. There's 1,250 use of force incidents that we gave to DOJ. We gave them to Professor Hickman. He analyzed it and he said, there's no way that it's 20% unconstitutional. At best, it's 1%, and it's probably less, which is what we thought at the time. And so he wrote an op-ed in the Seattle Times, and he says the DOJ owes Seattle an apology because they have no evidence to back up their claim of a pattern or practice. And it was just amazing. So why did all this happen?
Why?
and obviously things are very different now in the DOJ, right? Under Trump, they're very different now. So I'm talking about, the DOJ under the Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Biden administrations, which are pretty much the same in terms of consent decrees. So DOJ does not publish anything about consent decrees. So we don't know how they select. There are 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the country. In the last 30 years, there have been about 70 consent decrees. We don't know how they choose those cities to go after. We don't know what criteria they use to find a pattern or practice. We don't know who their experts are. They don't publish their experts. We don't even know who writes the reports that find a pattern or practice. They're unsigned reports. So my belief, based on what I've seen nationally over the last few decades, is that it's 100% political. If you look at the cities, there's never been a consent decree in Texas. And it's probably because they know that the local officials would never agree to a consent decree in Texas. Seattle was investigated at the same time as Austin. Austin got a technical assistance letter. Seattle got a consent decree. And so generally more liberal cities with a large group of anti-police activists are generally easier to get compliance with local officials than a more conservative city. So DOJ comes into these more liberal cities that have typically the most progressive police departments. They come in and they say, you're all bad and we have to fix you. And the community rises up, right? They're just like, yes, we've always known the Seattle Police Department is the worst. And now we have the feds coming in to save us.
Right.
So it's a win-win for DOJ to go into these blue cities.
And they also know the cities are looking at like, okay, what do you have for a budget? We can't fight the feds. We don't have the money. Let's just roll over and then eat it. But before they eat it, the gravy train rolls up to put gravy all over it. How much money do you think, Bob Scales, has been spent on the consent decree? And where did that money go?
Well, first of all, people think, this is what most officials think. We don't have the resources to fight the DOJ, right? So let's just sign this consent decree. But the reality is that you don't have to fight the DOJ. The DOJ has the burden of proof. The DOJ has to prove in court that there's a pattern or practice. You could just sit there and do nothing, and DOJ would still have their burden of proof. And there's only one agency that's ever challenged or ever said no to the DOJ, and that was a small county in North Carolina, the Alamance County Sheriff. And he said that the DOJ came in and said, you have a pattern or practice of bias policing, and you have to sign this consent decree. And the sheriff said, nope, not going to do it. So DOJ took him to federal court. DOJ had dozens of lawyers, expert witnesses. Alamance County had one lawyer, one expert witness, and DOJ lost miserably. And every other city has said, yeah, I'll sign it, no problem. And even though they don't have to, they can't be compelled to do it. They have to prove it in court. So the costs are so, what is a consent decree? What is not? I mean, generally your monitor is this is big business,
yes.
Right? And one of the reasons that the Seattle consent decree lasted so long is because you have private for-profit monitors who are making at least $1 million a year. The Chicago monitor's making more than $4 million a year for writing a few reports. They're accountable to no one. They're paid for by local taxpayers. The federal government doesn't pay a dime. And so you have this disincentive to find compliance because the monitor only gets paid. Like the Seattle monitor now lost a job, right? Because they're in compliance, so he has no more paycheck. So that's why these monitors. But I've seen about 5 years ago, I saw a report in the Seattle Times that said it was about $200 million on the Seattle consent decree, with about $20 million for the monitor. I think it's closer to 250 million now. And it's hard to sort of separate it out exactly because basically this is doing everything that the consent decree requires you to do. Some of that stuff you might have done anyway. The monitor is definitely an add-on from the consent decree. But we had to, in Seattle, it was so crazy. In Seattle, again, we had some of the best policies around, especially for use of force, model policies. We had to rewrite everything. That took about 2 years, and bring in consultants and experts and attorneys and So much time taking officers off the street. One of the real costs, especially for Seattle, is down about a third of their officers.
Right.
Pull so many officers off the street to deal with the consent decree and all the administrative burdens of the consent decree and the data collection, et cetera. So that's every city. Public safety has gone down when a consent decree goes into effect.
I saw that there's a study from the Manhattan Institute and from City Journal. They followed each one. Every time a consent decree goes in, the crime goes up. But just as we wrap this thing up, Bob, there were people that were working in the monitor's office that were being paid, I don't know how much, and $600 an hour, hardly doing anything, not even coming in, just simply billing. It was just an open account that just poured money out for this thing for 13 years. It's over, it's done. But for its obituary, you think the total amount from taxpayers is over $250 million?
About 250. I mean, the thing is I read something today that the city said that the total is 173 million. But we're talking a big number, whatever it is.
Whatever it is.
It's not peanuts, and that's over 13 years. But it's still you could do a lot with that kind of money. And again, what does Seattle have to show for that 173 to 250 million dollars? What is better now than before? And the thing is that one statistic I've heard is that use of force is down by 60%. Well, from what? I mean, the thing is, it doesn't matter. Use of force is a necessary part of policing. If someone flees or assaults the officer or resists arrest, officers can lawfully use force. The issue isn't, is use of force down 60%? It's down 60% because there aren't any officers to make arrests now. The issue is what percentage of those use of force are unconstitutional? And that's what Matt Hickman was saying, is that there's no evidence we had a problem to begin with. And now you're saying, you fixed a problem that never existed in the first place. Yeah.
I mean, to put a lighter touch on it, it's like that Broadway musical Music Man. You come in, we got problems right here in River City. It's about people playing pool, so he sells everybody a bunch of trombones because that's going to help the whole thing. So unfortunately, it's a sour note, but it's just one more scar and wound that the city of Seattle has to deal with, because I don't think a lot of people were not being honest about what's really happening with the police department. Bob Scales, thanks so much for spending some more time with us on this one, because as people were celebrating the decree, I said, wait, get Bob on the phone. He'll tell us exactly what was happening behind the scenes. Thanks for your time.